This week in the show, we're going to break the non-existing fourth wall because this week, we're talking about reality. Let's start with the real world. In my area, a new laser tag place just opened up recently, and it's another so-called tactical laser tag place. It's the fourth one in the area, actually. I guess the difference between tactical and traditional laser tag is that tactical is mission-based and has semi-realistic looking guns. In fact, the realism is a major selling point in these games.
This is hands down the most authentic combat simulation you have ever seen.
Sounds kind of familiar? Well, if you're a gamer, it should. Every generation of dark brown shooters makes similar promises, and it's kind of funny going into the archives. You find old games that are billed as realistic, and we now know they really were kind of bad. Looking at the history of gaming, you can see that we've been always chasing this reality thing. They've done everything from 3D virtual reality helmets to aftermarket vests that you can buy that simulates getting hit with bullets. $140. Compatible with Call of Duty and Halo. Not even joking. Now what gets me is that for every hyper-realistic game on the market, there's going to be another game that isn't. Some games choose style over sepia, and they're just as fun, if not more so. It leads to an uncomfortable question. Why do we want so much fake reality? I've said it before, I am a reality junkie. If given a choice of doing something for real or doing it virtually, I would rather strap on my snowboard and actually go riding. And I like to think there's a lot of other people like that too. And yet, these game designers keep on seeming like they want to push through the valley and up the other side. Let me get out the graph. The squiggle. Now, a lot of you guys already know this, but let's go over the basics real fast. Now, this is a very basic representation of a theory called the uncanny valley. The term comes from Masahiro Mori, who's a robotics professor. His theory states, in so many words, that you can make a robot more human and people will like it more. But as you push further, eventually you make something that just creeps people out. Well, why? There's a lot of theories. It doesn't look natural. It makes us uncomfortable for moral reasons. It looks like an animated corpse. It's just creepy to see something human that acts so robotic. A lot of theories. But for now, I can just simplify the valley like this. This is cool. This is cool. This is cool. This is creepy. This is back to being cool. So let's apply this concept to video games. The valley isn't as much creepy as it is jarring. In the push to make gaming more and more realistic, they've managed to swan dive into the valley with the grace of a greased-up brick. There are a lot of times where I do something in a realistic game knowing full well that in the real world, it wouldn't work. This has been a source of frustration for me, and it's where I get my scenic tour of the valley. We're going to start with what I would consider low-hanging fruit, World of Tanks. I have a love-hate relationship with this game. Mainly, I love to hate it. Thing is, though, that I have known people who have been tankers in their lives, as in people who have been paid to inhale and exhale diesel fumes for a living, tankers in their lives. Tank combat isn't really like this. World of Tanks has always hit me as a game that's been confused about how much reality it really wants. The models try to be hyper-realistic, and the combat is way too arcadish. For example, players will ram opponents as a normal tactic in World of Tanks. In the real world, you would only do this in a dire situation. And that's why World of Tanks dips way into the valley for me. Hyper-realistic models, arcade gameplay. Combine it with the HUDs, random miss mechanic, fog of war mechanics, Sixth Sense, all these things are at odds with the realistic models. And it ends up me yelling at the screen, oh come on, more than I care to admit. The same goes for a lot of shooter games. And I want to do a show someday going into full detail on this, but let's say for now, firefights don't work that way. I would have done that like Chaos D1, but I actually like my vocal cords, thank you large. One thing about these so-called realistic simulators are they try to copy the experience of the real thing with realistic interfaces. Joysticks are not as immersive as a steering wheel, and you can't feel like you're driving unless the whole seat's moving side to side so you can feel fake inertia. Unfortunately, it's not that effective. Any simulator in an arcade has to dumb down the concepts of the thing they're emulating so most players can feel like they're doing well. Let's take this game for example, Namco's Alpine Racer. The cabinet has two skis which swing freely from a pivot point at the tips of the skis, so casual players can just use them to turn left and right. People who actually ski could actually lean left and lean right in order to use the roll on the ski planks to simulate digging their edges in to get tighter turning. And I will grant that arcades are not the best place to learn how to ski. Well, this is a much better place. But my point is, they had to make concessions to the people who weren't already skiers so they could play. Reality takes a back seat for accessibility. Actually, the opposite can be said for most simulation games I've seen online. Simulation has, in my mind, become shorthand for we made the game so complicated for anyone but the hardcore players to play. It's to the point now that when I see the word simulation on a game, I roll my eyes and prepare for the worst. There's a lot of so-called simulations I put down after 1 minute of play because of this. Excuse me. Don't get me wrong, I've played on some really cool simulators in my time, a lot of which tried to be very realistic. The problem is that realism, every detail you add, you also add more complexity. Now, complexity does not always make it better, nor more realistic, nor even casually playable for that matter. You can also cause a very jarring experience when the simulation fails to deliver on its realism. Let's go back to laser tag. Now in this case, the guns are very realistic to firearms, more so than in almost every other laser tag game. The set pieces are good enough to set a mood, the lighting effects are pretty amazing, but does it push through the valley? In a word, no. The whole thing kind of nosedives right into the valley the moment the games begin, and actually that's the problem, the word game. Because you walk into a facility like that, you know you're playing a game. You start loading up a simulator, you know you're playing a game. It's just a game. At the laser tag place, this is really driven home when you look at the people you're playing with. T-shirts, jeans, no enforceable rank, and really no unit-style teamwork. In fact, if anybody wears BDUs into this place, they can pretty much get laughed at by the employees and other players. There's also rules you have to obey for safety's sake, which pretty much go unenforced. There's horde mode style of play, which you never really run out of bad guys, and they respawn with the knowledge of where you are, not to mention the outright cheaters. It's just something that yanks you out of the simulation experience. This goes for any simulation video game that I've seen on the public market. There's gaps that tear you out of the fantasy. Let's go back to the NASCAR sim. The 3 screens that simulate the world don't cover your peripheral vision, so there's many times you'll see other racers out of the corner of your eye, you'll glance over and you'll see them over in their cars getting bounced around on hydraulics. The illusion is ripped out right under you. In fact, you need to go extremely over the top to make a simulation immersive. Flight simulators, for example, they have to use things like hydraulics, full-scale models of the interiors, fully enclosed environments, and some hardware that will make the most hardcore gamers drool just to achieve a mostly immersive environment. And if you want to see what the US Army plays with, I guarantee it's enough to make you want to sign up. For that matter, I've only seen one FPS simulator that might make me interested in playing the genre, and it's this one. It was built for the Gadget Show on BBC. They decided to make Battlefield 3 an immersive experience, and it includes an omnidirectional treadmill, paintball guns shooting reballs, lighting systems, a hacked Kinect. A lot of hardware, but they made it work. I think you're starting to see the problem here. In order to climb up the other side of the valley, you gotta have the money to buy the equipment. You gotta have a place to put it. You gotta even be dressed the correct way in order to get in the right mindset to do all this stuff. It's kind of like a practical joke that everyone's in on, especially the victim. That's a hell of a lot to ask for in order just to climb up the valley and get a little bit more reality in your games. But I'm going to go on a limb here and say you really don't want reality. I'm going to outright just say this. Reality sucks. I'm going to guess that right now, where you're sitting, you're not more than 15 feet from outside. You could go get some reality. You don't really want to, because as fun as it would be to get into a firefight at 3 a.m., there's that whole dying and being illegal thing to contend with. Games provide this sort of fantasy world where it's safe to put on someone else's skin for a while, not to mention it's just more legal. This is why I think designers push for more realistic games. The idea is you're going to lose yourself into the illusion of reality if it looks hyper-realistic, and it'll give you a sense of being a hero and a high of being a badass. Problem is that unless it's a closed environment where you control all the variables, the illusion falls apart if even one of these pieces don't fit. In all honesty, a stylized game is more immersive than the most hyper-realistic ones for this reason. Which brings me back to the laser tag. Was it fun? Kind of. Taken as its own experience, it was passable. But as a realistic one, not so much. I guess if I'd have gone in with more of a laser tag mindset instead of a combat simulation one, I might have enjoyed it more. Ironically, it seems that lately this same facility has dropped a lot of their immersive promises and taken a more traditional laser tag look with colored vests and headband sensors. Ironic because they mock other laser tag places for this look on their own website, so even they seem to be leaning away from the realistic, but for me, it's too little, too late. There are balance points in which you have just enough reality, but you have to temper it with style. MMOs usually have an Earth-like gravity and physics, but we don't question how people can fly. We don't ask how mountain vehicles appear out of nowhere. Hell, we don't even ask where toons are hiding their big honkin' melee weapons. We just accept hammer space as a thing. We overlook these gaps within a stylized framework of a game. Problem comes in is when you try to make your game as real as possible. We live in the real world, and when something doesn't look right or feel right, we notice, and the game nosedives right down into the valley. With that in mind, one of the fastest ways to ruin a perfectly good immersive experience for me is when I stumble over one of the gaps in your game. For example, they say that, oh, I don't know, you're going to put me into a combat simulator, it's going to be completely realistic, and then you just tell me, oh yeah, we can bounce bullets off the back wall and shoot people in the back of the head. That's going to be kind of a fun killer for me. Things like this are reasons that I think that studios are wasting their time and money chasing hyper-reality. Because unless your simulation is absolutely perfect, style will beat simulation any day of the week.
Hold on, I'm gonna refill it.
4, 3, 2, 1. Go, go, go.
Really, dude? Really?
They're out there. Don't respond wherever you want on the map.
I was on the back of the wall, man.
Yeah, it reflects off the walls.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right.